Hello, everyone. Today, we will be discussing the book Internal Family Systems Therapy for Addictions, the first half of section 4 with the title Treatment. Let's take a moment and find something that stood out for you or a question you may have. I'll start first because I did find quite a lot of interesting stuff here in this first section. So what I really liked is the therapist role. It says the title. What's the therapist role? Is connection and collaboration. And I find that interesting because it's not about just the therapist connecting and collaborating with the client, but also having that internal experience of connection and collaboration. And also, I'm having a little bit of a question here. So what is important when when a client chooses us or a specific person? Is it, do you think it's some therapists we get on better with some therapists, or we vibe? Or because everyone, if they know IFS and they practice it themselves, then they would be competent. Is it enough just to be a competent IFS therapist, or is there something else needed? Yes, Anne?
That's such an interesting question. And I always wonder, like, if you had the ultimately sensitive therapist, in theory, they should be able to, adjust flexibly, perfectly for everyone's various parts, right? And yet, I'm guessing that, inevitably we're limited in how much experience we've had with all sorts of, all the infinite ways we can experience life. And if someone's either experience or their natural inner way of being is slightly more similar in a way that's not reactive, but actually can understand, I feel like would give the therapist such a leading edge, in terms of there's still a lot of choice in how you get to know parts, I suppose, right? Like there's still a choice. And I mean, I know it's very neutral. What do you see? How are you there? But I think subtly, even in some tone of voice or, maybe which to choose first and which to prioritize, there is difference in attunement. And also, I think there is something about how people speak, like the rhythm of the way they talk and like how they emphasize words or the words they tend to choose, even though we've talked a lot about how one should be choosing the most, gentle and collaborative and non-coercive language. Even still, I think, some people are just maybe more monotone, and maybe some people are less comfortable with that. Some people are more comfortable with that. Other people might really enjoy an expressive person or a faster talking person or a slower talking person. So I think there still is therapist personality and individuality. Yeah, so
Yes.
I'm complete.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Anne. And in this section of the book, Cece Sykes talks about the tone of voice. And I do find myself, when I have clients, my speed and tone, they do change significantly. Something else came up to mind is, what about transgender people? They may prefer a transgender therapist, and it might not just be enough the attunement, also different types of background. But thank you. Yeah, Marlene.
Hi. Yes, I don't think it's just the knowledge the therapist has, of course. I think first and foremost, it's building a rapport, having a lot of warmth and openness and kindness. and not immediately overwhelming the client by demanding that they divulge every hard issue immediately. You know, there's a slow building of a rapport and a connection. There has to be an emotional connection, I think, to develop trust. And it takes a lot of patience. And the therapist having access to their self qualities, you know, the curiosity, the compassion, the creativity, the caring, all of that is paramount, I think, before the person's knowledge. You know, that has to be there, of course. And the versatility, you know, for all the different people that come to therapy, because everybody's totally different and everybody has different groups they belong to. And definitely being aware and knowledgeable about LGBTQ and transgender, and I think empathy is the biggest thing. Just loving people. Thank you.
Thank you so
I'm
much,
done.
Molly. That's brilliant. Thank you. And feel free to raise your hand if you, as I said, you know, if you want to share any aha moments or ask any questions. And I will be scrolling through the book. And if you find a point that of interest, let me know. I am at another place of the book here, and I have found some interesting points. But I also invite you to let me know if there's something for you guys. Yeah, Anne?
I have heard in some therapy trainings that they ask the therapist to be also acknowledging what's happening in the room for them. In this case, it would be their own parts. Like, oh, I have a part of me that, you know, reacted this way. But of course, with discretion, I suppose, right? Like before we had talked about if there is a, say, racist client or someone with very strong anger towards something that maybe, you know, the therapist doesn't relate to.
Yeah.
Because you know what? Sorry, I'm gonna just jump in the PESI training video that we mentioned in our group on attachment theory that was free for a while. Like they had in the bonus section in the attachment theory training video that the therapist is supposed to acknowledge any sort of relational discomfort. In their training, it was like you're supposed to, even if there's like sexual tension in the room, like it's like, okay, let's mention it and talk about it. You know, I mean, that's in a very extreme thing. I don't know to what extent that's common practice at all. So I guess I was just wondering with IFS, because it's such a, you know, that's kind of a non-interfering and okay, it's all about, you know, making room for the client's parts. To what degree is there the experience of, do you have the experience of, you know, bringing or acknowledging any of your parts? Is that ever part of IFS? Because it's just, I thought of it because it says in this highlighted part, check inside, validate our reactive parts, which I assume it meant like internally and to ourselves. But to what extent is it ever something that you would say out loud, you know?
Yeah, later on in this, there is some, like a few sentences around this issue raised about therapists sharing their own parts. They do advise that a therapist shares what's happening in their system and also apologizes if you know, somehow the client might you know, a therapist might trigger a client. They might have like a fixer part wanting to fix the damage they do with addiction, and then the therapist may say, oh, sorry, my fixer part came forward, I apologize. Yeah, they do say, yeah, but again,
Thank you. Yes.
yeah, and it is quite a different approach, isn't it? Having the therapist own up and, you know, be so transparent. Yeah, I will move a little bit. You know, I think the next page is quite amazing. because here, Cece Sykes put a quote from Pema Chodron. She said, Pema wrote, compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It's a relationship between equals. Only when we know our own darkness well can we be present with the darkness of others. Compassion becomes real when we recognize our shared humanity. There's somebody else that talks about shared humanity. What's the name of the girl that she wrote extensively about compassion?
Is it Tara Brach?
Is Tara Brach? Oh, somebody, could be Tara Brach. It will come to me. But yeah, and you know,
Brene Brown?
It's not, I'll find it, but yeah. Passion books. I think it's grammar. She did something with grammar, his name. The Compassionate Mind, Self-Compassion. Self-Compassion, who wrote that?
Kristen Neff is the researcher.
That's it. That's the one. Kristen Neff. Kristen Neff wrote extensively about shared humanity and compassion. So, and here it's about, you know, they're not, I'm the healer, I'm the one better than you. But it's not that. It's not a, I'm the healer, you're the wounded. No. It's a relationship between equal. So that's why I think even the, you know, when the therapist owns up and says, hey, you know, I have that part as well. I had that kind of firefighter or manager trying to fix something in you. And, you know, it's like you own up your own darkness and acknowledge that shared humanity. You know, typically in other settings, you know, the therapist would be from a place of authority, I guess. You must not do this. Sign up that you will not, you know, you will not kill yourself or something. There's a lot of authority there, but well, IFS has got a different stance. Yeah. Anne?
I think this is really interesting in the context of the discussion we had with the shame group on compassion versus empathy. And it really requires that level of work where we are able to bring compassion in an effective way without lessening the self-energy, right? Bring empathy in the effective way, right? Because I guess in the previous book, we had discussed how empathy can actually provoke a reactive response, then that becomes unhelpful and it can get in the way of compassion because it can create pain in ourselves, right? As the therapist role. And so this really is like such strong work towards having self-energy as the therapeutic person, because to be able to have the empathy so that the parts seem real and on equal ground, whereas because we're asking the client to bring their parts and all of the, you know, the messiness of their parts to the fore. And if we're really going to let ourselves bring our messy parts to the fore, we have to have so much like compassion itself to counteract any sort of like empathic negative reaction that could happen, right? I think so.
Yeah. During therapy, the like, you know, therapist, my understanding is the therapist can bring their parts to the fore, but it, you know, it is the therapist's responsibility to become self-led, to invite their parts to unblend, to his or her parts to unblend and focus on the client, I guess. And, you know, own up and focus on the client's parts. So, yes, it is, it takes a lot of skill and work and experience. If we're complete here, and thank you, Anne, yeah. I would like, you know, there is something here that I loved. I want to share with you guys. Here, this one, it says, she says, Cece Sykes, the deeper the client's pain and disorganization, the longer and more intense the therapy, and the more pressure on the therapist's system. And I absolutely loved that sentence. And I am curious whether people understand this, or how you know, if there's an example from your life or from people you see around you, or how do you, if you want to share, it's up to you. How do you understand that?
So on watching the same, oh, sorry, I'm gonna let Grace talk.
Yeah. Grace?
Yeah, hi. I think that particular passage refers to it being more difficult because the fixer parts come in, or the therapist parts come in, or the caretaking, and it says that right afterwards, right? Like it's more difficult and more pressure, because if we ourselves as the practitioner therapist have these parts that want to take care of the client, it's more difficult over time. And I do want to go back to what the earlier discussion was about. So the thing they said about knowing your own darkness, and then if you have a part that comes up in a session, do you address it? And then, I think what's really important to say is that in order to do that, in order to take a pause, because it does say to take a pause and see if you could work with your own parts. And if not, then you can speak to the person and say, oh, I have this part up. But you're not going to do like a session around your own stuff. Like the practitioner therapist, and I do this, my therapist does this, is pause. It's called a U-turn. You pause. You say, oh, what's up with me? Who's here? And you don't say it out loud. If you're with a client, you're like with your own system. And if you can't do that, if the part is really big and loud, then you say to the client, oh, can you just give me a minute? I have a part that's coming up right now, and I'd like to be with it. And it's not like you're saying, oh, this is the part, and this is how it feels, and this is what it's saying. None of that is part of it. It's really about going inside, doing the U-turn, and that can only happen with practice and knowing your own darkness, doing your own work, finding the ability to be with your self-energy, right? Like it's really a skill, and it's a practice, and it's something, I think those three things that she talks about, what makes someone who's working on the other side of someone like a good fit. Well, Dick Schwartz is a great example. Like the only good fit you need, he's a white male, right? That's straight, and he can work with anybody's system. Why? Because he embodies self-energy. And if you are sitting on the other side with someone who's got that amount of practice, 40 years he has, of self-energy, it doesn't matter anything else about them, what color their skin is, what sex they are, any of that, it won't matter. If self-energy is the most profound thing that's leading a session, parts will just react in a very positive way to that. I'm complete.
Yes, Anne?
Grace, thank you for that additional clarification of when the therapist would share their parts, which is really helpful. Yeah, I guess the whole thing about whether the therapist's individual nature, how much that comes to play, I guess it's even more relevant when one's not like at the extreme Dick Schwartz level yet. I guess it's like until one is at like the ultimate Zen master self-energy capability, then maybe there's more, like it's easier when your parts are not activated in the useful way, and they tend to be activated in the helpful way for the individual client. And I guess in response to Vana's question, again, watching from that PESI video, what they had said in the attachment theory lectures was that it was quite common for clients to get angry at the therapist and then even accuse the therapist of trying to sabotage them, which I didn't realize that. I mean, I'm not like a therapist, so I don't know how common that is. I mean, when I asked my friend who's a therapist, he didn't have it that common in his practice. But then what they said in that video was, you know, it was just a rule of thumb that the trainer gave, but I thought it was a very good session. And I thought it was very interesting that the trainer said, if your attachment style tends to be a bit preoccupied, like you tend to be more emotional and more emotionally reactive, if anything, you know, or in general, of course, it's all contextual, then you do better with clients that are more shut down. Like it's easier to stay like present and emotionally sensitive because they're kind of shut down and you're emoting. Whereas conversely, if the client's very reactive and very emotive in a kind of, you know, aggressive way or a very angry way, then if you're the therapist, they were saying if the therapist was more avoidant, like they tend towards having a slightly more shut down effect, they're able to buffer themselves from that kind of very high reactive sort of client. And I just thought it was interesting. So I guess in the perfect case or the extremely self-energy led, then of course self-energy would be able to account for, you know, everything regardless of, you know, individual attachment, you know, non-securities that anyone might have. But given that maybe we're not perfect yet, or like just even on a harder day, as it wears down, as Grace was saying, over time, you know, if it's a more difficult problem that the client has, the longer it takes, the more patience is required, the more wearing it can get, then, you know, that under that strain, then maybe self-energy also, you know, there's a challenge being put towards like, you know, that consistency, maybe because we could have a bad day or whatever. So yeah, I thought it was very interesting that, sorry, I think I slightly lost my train of thought.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think these are the ways that it can be difficult, is if the client sometimes seems to not believe in the therapy anymore, or even is negative towards the therapist. Yeah, I don't know what others' experience has been with that.
And a quick question: any names for this video you mentioned? Just in case.
Yeah, I'll look it up and put it in the chat. I don't have it off the top of my head, but it's the one that I think you told, where one of us in the group mentioned it, and that's how I knew about it. But I'll look it up. Yeah, it was very, very good. Yeah.
Was the IFS an attachment or something?
I don't think it was IFS. I think it was just attachment theory.
Okay.
Yeah, but it was very like relational and you know, very compatible. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds interesting when you say like if the therapist has got a different attachment style than the client, that might be a good fit.
Yeah. Yeah.
I used to worry if, say, before my IFS years, I would worry if my client had a shutdown attachment approach style. Mine is more active, but IFS, you know, I makes working with clients with whatever types of systems makes this kind of work easier. That's my perspective. But yeah, that was interesting. Yeah, Marlene?
Yes, in terms of the more difficult and long-lasting therapy, yes, the more the person is disorganized and bereft, because there's a lot of grief in this process of letting go. On page 90, it says the clients have lost their access to self-leadership and self-trust, but we believe they still have the capacity for self-compassion and self-governance. And that's interesting to me because it seems that the capacity for self-compassion is lost because the critics are so voracious. You know, the protectors, the managers are so harsh by now. But it says here that the therapist helps the client locate that part, that self-compassion, which is really the self, with a part of the self. and then to build on that. So it's interesting that no matter how disorganized and discombobulated an addict gets, and how much loss there is, that there can still be self-compassion, but it has to be located. It seems like it's obscured. And thank you, I'm done.
Yeah, that is what the merchant of hope brings to a session. That no matter what's up, no matter how scary it is, no matter how big it is, no how overwhelmed it is, that person who's on the other side of you does have self-energy underneath all that, right? Like that's and to share that with the client, that what if you didn't have to do this alone, right, to a part? What if you had access to self-energy of your own, right? Like not just from the therapist, but that is the hope. That's the message of hope from the merchant.
Thank you.
Yes, that's brilliant. So she talks in this section about the hope. She doesn't call it hope merchant, but I made a note. This is a hope merchant. And she talks about something like, there are no excuses, there are reasons. Because, you know, somebody might criticize someone, oh, that's your excuse to go out and drink. And Cece Sykes talks and explains, there are no excuses, but there are reasons, and there is hope. Understand the reasons and offer hope. And also, I thought this is relevant somehow. I don't know why, but the two teams escalate together and they de-escalate together. So it is interesting, you know, when we become more critical and judgmental of one team, of like, the addiction team, the harm team, and then the harm team will become more extreme. But once one part of the team de-escalates, the other part, the tug of the war, kind of like calms down. Yes, Marie?
Hi, thank you, Vanna. I bought the book this morning, so I'm just reading what is here right now. And but I see where it said there are reasons. I'm an addict and a recovered addict and alcoholic, and I need to bring that out because I know in our literature of addiction, or in my literature of addiction, in my experience, I could only bring my experience. Practical experience shows that nothing will ensure immunity from using as more intensive work with an alcoholic. So if a therapist is not an addict or an alcoholic, in my opinion, there needs to be some sort of relatability, and all the things that were said, with my own parts, etc. I need a moment, I need some time, so that person could see that vulnerability. But if a therapist is not an addict, perhaps relatability through the reasons, like she's saying, there are reasons, and fear has reasons, and everyone has fear. So if I relate, I know when I work with another, and I do workshops with other alcoholics and addicts, and when my relatability comes into my fear, and almost also my own undiscipline in my life. So if I say to them that perhaps, and not so much saying my parts, because I don't want to confuse, because I don't know much about IFS. I'm not fully really trained, but I've read all the material. But my relatability to being undisciplined, that opens that's where you see a light go off, because it's more like me too. And it becomes this little me too. And that in itself, there's always, in my experience only, and I can only give you that, is this gratitude when we leave each other going, wow, you know, you're human. And I have all these and you have all these, and I can't wait to see you again. And so by relating my fear and showing my own self-compassion and my own self-trust to those fears that have, the fear has all the reasons. It's not like so much why the addiction, but why the pain. I'm in pain because I'm in fear. So, you know, I need to start where they are, you know, just like I did when I went to recover, is to start where I am at that moment and have them feel like they understand. And I'll end with prejudices, you know, even relating ability in the prejudice of overcoming addiction, because I've had so much prejudice in overcoming addiction, and this isn't going to work for me. This ain't working. This therapist isn't working. This is all BS. I've had all this, and just having that risk of having that, it was like I own that. So when I sit with someone else and I say, well, I had that too. I had that. I don't want to go there. I don't want to be there at 3 o'clock with that therapist. I don't, that counselor, that rehab, that this, that. I was there. And it turns into almost like a commentary to who could overdo each other. And there's a part of me that's really scared right now to say this. So I'm glad I shared, and I'm complete. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's very interesting, your sharing, and thank you for sharing your vulnerability as well. A lot of food for thought. And I am interested, from what you said, I really think all of us suffer from some kind of addiction at some point of our life. Some people may be like, you know, somebody who suffers from alcoholism, they might prefer a therapist who has gone down that path. And here, if you notice in this, I'm sharing screen, you know, those two teams, like the addiction team and the other one says stop it, the controlling, they try to find a balance. And the therapist's job is to normalize that polarity. And I'm hearing you, if the therapist has gone down the same kind or similar addiction, then it's more normalized. It's another way of normalizing that inner polarity. And IFS can also normalize that polarity, the IFS approach and philosophy for life, for living. Yeah. Yeah. So, Marie, I am curious a little bit, just to, and it's okay if you want to answer or not. Do you think it helps if the therapist had past experience of the same addiction?
It doesn't necessarily have to be the same addiction, because, for instance, I could just give you my experience. I have a sponsee who is a gaming addict. And every day I have that person. I can only give suggestions, right? So every day I have them write down what went well, what went sideways, what was at risk, what do they feel their part was, how could they have resolved their day better in certain areas, because there's always an area to resolve in your day. I could have always done something better in the last 24 hours. What am I grateful for, and what my goals are for the future? Now, I know nothing about gaming. But just me sharing what went well, what went sideways, what was at risk, what I could have resolved. And that person, I could see almost like I could feel a channel opening between the two of us.
Yeah.
And it was very scary for me because I had a lot of parts that said, you know nothing about gaming. You've
Okay.
had, you know, and the answer to your question, does someone have to be the same addiction or close to it? No, not at all. I don't believe so. And just the relatability of not being disciplined in that area will open the person up and clear a pathway.
Great, great.
I hope that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. That's brilliant. Thank you. I'm not sure who's next. I've got Marie and Marlene's hands up. So,
Hi, I'll be short.
mhm.
What was just said reminds me of the other self energy choice, growing the capacity to make healthy decisions. And I like that because, yes, there's always a part of life where you can do something. You know, even if I'm not successful in not using marijuana as an example, I can do the dishes and I can have an efficacy there. So the idea of choice and healthy decisions, that it's up, you know, I can choose. Thank you. I'm done.
Thank you. And I do have a comment on that. And so if I think, Marlene, if the inner chaos, disorganization, there's a lot of it, a lot of disorganization in the system, we would struggle with finding choice. I know from my experience, like I used parts therapy with hypnosis, and that's what I would normally do. I would ask, you know, the smoker, what is another job, a better job with the same positive intention? And for many people, it would be like, oh, you know, I'll play the guitar, or, you know, I'll buy a puppy, or I'll go swimming. And it was that easy to replace, to have choice instead of smoking or gambling, to do something healthy with the same kind of outcome. The outcome is like, I want to relax from stress, and that will. But that is not the case for everyone. And I am, from reading this book, I think it's because some people have more chaotic inner systems that need first to be seen, befriended, yeah, so they can build the trust. There's no trust in the system. So it does depend.
Thank you so much for that.
Thank you. And here on, you can see what I'm sharing. I'm sharing the triangle mapping for a polarized system. And I, you know, she talks about the inverted triangle, where you put the managers, firefighters, and exiles. So she advises that we see our system, and I think this is so important. And she says, maybe instead of making the list of these parts, like the firefighters, the managers, and the exiles, around this theme, like the theme of addiction, one theme of addiction. How many parts are, what are the stakeholders? What are the participants? What are the teams? Who is fighting with who? Where are the exiles? And what I've been doing with like clients, at the end of the session, I would ask them to make a list of the parts that showed up and to notice the pattern. how often those parts show up in their system. Because, I do think it's important they get to know those parts. They get to befriend them. They know what are the exiles, what are the managers that keep showing up around this theme. So she talks about, you may want to write down, may want to use the sun tray, IFS inspired cards, magazine cutouts, and identify all the parts in that inverted triangle. And she asks some interesting questions, because it's not just about identifying the parts, but also how they relate to each other. For example, I really love some of the questions. Which part-to-part relationships stand out? Which parts are most polarized? How do you feel toward your exile? It's, try, and I think this is the key. If you manage to unblend from a manager or a firefighter and an exile, if you have that experience of unblending from, your parts and your exiles, it is, I've had this experience in therapy, and I'm trying to do this kind of work on by myself as well. And I think it is, wow, it's quite incredible, because it's so painful when all those parts are in the body. But when they are blended, it's like, wow, it's like heaven. It's not easy, but that's why it's important to understand them, to get to know how they relate to each other, to know the system. That's why it's a system. Yeah. And I think I will go ahead and use the triangle she recommends, and probably I will experiment with that triangle. So I am curious, guys, do you use the triangle at all yourselves, or is this the first time you've come across it?
I've used it before.
Mm-hmm. Do you find of any use, Grace?
Yes, it is helpful. It's a way to externalize your parts and blend.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking for it. Maybe I could show it to you.
Yeah.
But keep going. I don't know where it is.
Yeah, don't worry. Yeah, and this, like, here, another thing I found interesting is about the strategies for helping polarized part unblend at the same time. At the same time, wow, not one by one. So when somebody is so blended and triggered by so many things, maybe somebody has got complex trauma, and they come to you they go to a therapist, and there's so many parts. So using some of those techniques or strategies are incredible.
I found them. So
Yeah.
I have like 3. I don't know if you guys can see. Probably not. Oh,
yeah.
There's one.
Oh, wow.
Lot of writing, as you can see.
Yes.
The exiles on the bottom.
Yeah. Yeah.
Firefighters.
Wow.
That's
yes.
one. And then I have, like, here's another one, much less scribbles. And it's probably around food, this particular one.
Yes.
And then one more.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing.
You can see there's manager parts, and there's firefighter parts, self in the middle, and then the exile. So there's even like stuff about, you can see ration. They're all around food. My latest firefighter parts that are taking over my life.
Thank you so much. It's inspirational. Thank you so much for sharing something so private. Thank you.
I want to say that I think Daria does a workshop with the triangle.
Yes, she does. Yeah. Wow, that's so it is about creating them up. If it's around the food or around whatever somebody wants to explore. Yes, yes.
Funny. Here's another one. So you could see like
Self, yeah.
his balance, right?
Okay, yeah, okay.
So, and I also do polarization exercises with role playing and psychodrama, which is a really great way to externalize polarized parts as well.
Yes. Let's. If I. Okay, here I'm gonna. Yeah, thank you so much. There is here a strategy in the book here, which sounds a little bit like psychodrama. Is the therapist handout externalizing and personifying polarized parts, interviewing one part at a time. So this exercise inquires into the motives and feelings of polarized parts by interviewing one part at a time. And interview this part with the following questions. So it is direct access. I don't know why she hasn't called this direct access, but you allow the part to blend in like psychodrama, like the sculpting exercise from the IFS Healing Circles book. And you let it blend in and you interview it. Here are some interesting questions. What is your job? Why do you do this job? What would happen if you stopped doing it? What do you want for the client? How old were you when you got this job? Yeah. What is it like to do this job? Whom do you protect? What do you want the client to know? Those are like direct access questions. You embody one part at a time. And I love this technique. I love this before even, when someone cannot unblend, you may want to invite them to feel fully blended with a part and express it, and then unblend. And maybe even become even more, when it blends, allow it may even to be more dramatic with its expression. That reminds me of psychodrama. So I'm complete with this. I'll scroll through the book, and if there is anything else that stands out for you guys or anything you want to share, feel free. Yes, Marlene?
I was just noticing, making coffee, that I have absolutely no polarized parts around my addiction to coffee. But I have huge polarized parts around my addiction to marijuana. And my addiction to alcohol was resolved through Alcoholics Anonymous, and I've been alcohol-free for 25 years. But I'm very burdened with the marijuana addiction, and I'm smoking low grade now, way down from the high THC, which has no effect. So that's how I'm trying to quit. And It's so interesting. Here I'm making coffee. I drink 12 cups of coffee per day. My doctor thinks it's outrageous. And I have no feelings around that. No critic. What's that all about? It's an addiction.
Yeah, Anne?
Thank you for sharing that interesting thought and insight, Marlene. I wondered if maybe you're not perceiving the coffee as interfering with your life. I mean, even if the doctor says like, oh, it's too much, it's unhealthy, if you're not actually experiencing it as constricting, whereas, and I don't know how much the marijuana is a societal thing. You know, it could be that, you know, it's more societally, of course, that's the big thing, what's societally acceptable, what's societally not, and that affects our opinion of ourselves a lot. And so maybe it's that, and I don't know if there is an extent to which you feel that the ones that you have problems with, the reliances that you have problems with, you feel like it's interfering with your life more than the coffee or not. Yeah, I'd be curious what you think.
So interesting. Thank you. Yeah, the coffee doesn't seem to interfere much, except it dehydrates. So it's quite a health issue if you don't drink water. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
Thank you. Marlene, I think I also have something to say on that. And it is mentioned in the book. There are vignettes where like the client goes to the therapist and says, "Oh, my wife told me to be here," or you know, whoever else. They, not me. I don't want to be here. Wherever, you know, my doctor said I must come and see you. And you know, the job of the IFS therapist practitioner is that magic word that Grace mentioned, the U-turn, to see, you know, I wonder, I can't find this place now here in this book, but it's something like that. I wonder, is that something you also said to yourself? Or maybe I'm drinking a bit too much coffee somewhere in there. Maybe there is a small part. Something else takes priority, but you know.
You're right. Wow, that's good.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. And I do have another.
I just want to say,
yeah, go, Chris.
I was wondering, Marlene, I thought that was so interesting what you just shared. But then at the end, you said, and then there's a part that knows that if you get dehydrated from it, right? So there is a part that's concerned about your health regarding the coffee. And maybe that same part is the one that says, oh, as long as we drink enough water, we'll be okay, right? Like it's a manager. Yeah.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
That's
Not
so
a critic.
true. So
Not a
true.
don't have to be critics, by the way.
Thank you, women.
Yeah, I wonder something else now. Is there, because we tend to have minimizers, could there be a minimizer somewhere? I don't know. You know, now you said that, we can go and look at the list of firefighters and managers, the common ones, in a moment.
Yeah, my biggest ones are the ones that rationalize and say, you deserve this. Look at all the things you've given up. You deserve this coffee or this, whatever it is. Like, it's like a part that's like, feels like it, you know, all the suffering and everything it's given up, it deserves at least this.
Oh, yes. Far too often for me. I deserve what I shouldn't have far too often. But there is hope.
Right?
And
Minimizers, justifiers, rationalizers, denial, denial, denial.
yeah, yeah. And I'm sharing screen here, and you know, you talked about, Marlene, you talked about before, what about if instead of doing something harmful, you do something good for the system? And here she talks, there's Aunt Thea, I think it's called Thea. She's this vignette is, she's a Greek woman with some kind of addictions, and they came into a kind of like agreement. So that there will not be a lot of, the managers agreed to ease up on the, put less pressures on the shoulds. You should do this, you should do that, do better, and work hard, work all day. They agreed to ease up on the shoulds, and the addiction said, if you do that, we will also ease up and we will not drink as much. And so she says here, in this example, the therapist guided Thea, I'm not sure, Thea, to validate both teams in her addiction polarity, and then brokered a harm reduction deal where each side agreed to ease up a bit. This truth may not hold for long, but it gave Thea more information about the concerns and compassions of her protectors. The conversation had not yet gotten around to her exiles, but that would come next. Yeah, this is, it looks like part to self to part relationship is essential, and also, you know, helping out the exiles seems to be, you know, I don't know, in some cases possibly essential. So, you know, we can have the parts negotiate with each other, but will that be enough without working with the exile, with the pain? Might not be. I don't know. I think that's the approach I get from this book, that you really need to work with a triangle. Yes, Grace?
Yeah, and I think what's interesting with polarized parts is that they typically are protecting the same exile. So when they get to know each other and why they do what they do and why they work so hard, they come to an agreement that, oh, wow, I get it. Like, it's kind of like they're both meeting each other. And then they see that they're protecting the same little one. And so there comes this collaboration, and okay, maybe we can soften back, right? They're not so polarized. They're closer to the middle of balance.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
I'm complete.
Thank you. That's beautiful.
That's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Well said. Is there anything else from this book, guys, you want to share? There was something, I can't remember now how, yeah.
Can you go to the page of the visualizing that there was you just flashed back by it? Other ways of visualizing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. There's lots of ways to externalize parts.
Is the idea that there's also something kind of inviting about imagining one of these different ways, and so that kind of maybe adds a sense of warmth to the and distance and unblending, like maybe this type of visualization around a campfire or an orchestra is a way of unblending itself?
Yes, and in the IFS circle, the way that they tell you to visualize them is simply one in each hand. It doesn't have to be elaborate. So imagine one part, I use this a lot in sessions. Imagine one part in one hand, another part in another hand.
That's really lovely, thank you.
I'm not sure I like this one. Or, you know, I'm one team in one hand and another team in another hand. And she says, you know, notice which one is heavier. I know this is also an NLP, you know, neuro-linguistics programming technique I've learned years ago. For me, you know, it does depend on the client, but, you know, for me, I like to imagine a safe place, like maybe in the forest around the campfire. And already this kind of visualization brings the elements of the self, the kind of calm energy. And then I'm inviting, my polarized parts to sit around the campfire, and I'll have a chat with them. And I can do that as a meditation, morning meditation or evening meditation. So but again, today I invited my exile to sit opposite myself, to sit right like close to me, wherever I was in real space, without imagining another place.
I also want to just say that another important thing to know is it doesn't necessarily have to be just two parts that are polarized. There can be several.
And that sounds very complex, Grace. So loads of parts fighting with each other. It's like a football match gone wrong, whatever, riot, football riot. Mark?
That would
Can't hear you very well, Mark. Closer to your mic, please.
oh, sorry. Now you hear me better?
Yes.
That would just be that bullet number 5 there. Self conducts an orchestra and polarized protectors are the musicians. For the one that you just said sounded pretty complicated, where it's more than just, the polarity between a firefighter and a manager, or just two things, where it gets more complicated. Or even with the kitchen table, it's like you could have like 5 different parts around the kitchen table, but it definitely does sound more complicated to get beyond just two things in a polarity. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
I guess the referee for polarized teams, I can't think of a sport where there's 3 different teams competing, so that's just implies 2 things. But the idea of an orchestra is we got the strings, we got the percussion, we got the woodwinds, we got the brass, so you could use that to visualize a gathering for a more complex group of polarized parts.
Wow. That confused me. Wow. I typically understand that, the managers will polarize the firefighters, and they're like 2 teams. That's how I'm kind of imagining it. But Grace, are you saying that there could be more than like 2 teams, like a team of like, what?
Oh, no, I wasn't referring to teams. I was referring to parts that there could be several parts that, there could be 2 firefighters. It doesn't have to be manager and firefighter, right? It could be 2 firefighters, and then there could be, it really is, everybody's system is different, is basically what I just wanted to point out, that you don't know until you go in, and then you'll find out.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, brilliant. And I'd also like to point here is here. I'm going to read this part quickly here. To help clients make this connection, we invite them to slow down, turn their attention inside, notice what happened in the days or hours before they gave into an addictive urge, and notice what they feel right now. We know their needy parts feel desperate and abandoned. So it's also important to understand the context. What happened before the addiction? The days before, hours before. Yeah. And here she's, there's so many interesting bits here. We know that exiled emotions and memories are connected to the client's addictive process. Yeah. And okay, I'm gonna read on this page. I'm gonna read another part about being self-led. What it means. Cece Sykes says we must be able to help our clients be curious and compassionate, but being curious and compassionate ourselves. This is what we call being self-led. We have been curious and compassionate with our client, so we're being self-led, and yet we also have parts, the parts that have learned to do the therapy, the parts that are doing the therapy. There's so many parts in that process. It's not just self. Does that make sense at all to anyone? That's what I'm getting. Parts are involved when we are self-led. It's not just self. I guess self is the leader of the parts. So when a therapist does therapy with a client, being self-led does not just mean that there's just self. There are also lots of parts. So
this reminds me of the thing before we talked about of the empathy and bringing our parts to use empathy, just like earlier in our discussion. Because I'm thinking now that sometimes when you talk to someone, you can tell if they're being compassionate, but like in a slightly more distanced way, like and versus if you tell them your story, and even if they're just saying or they're not saying many words, but it feels like they know how you feel, and sometimes it's like that whole thing of just knowing someone's there with you, and that requires part empathy, I think, right?
oh my God, I love that. It reminds me a bit of what Marie was saying before. And I think having empathy often is essential before we move into compassion. Yeah, because empathy can cause a lot of pain, but you get to feel your client's pain or another human being's pain.
Yeah, and I think that's so healing for the client, for them to feel that someone's willing to be there with them.
Yeah, to go there.
Yes.
Yeah, and in the same way, like if I take some clients to work with their exile, sometimes they feel the pain of the exile, and I'm like, is that okay? I'm really feeling the pain, and I'm like, yeah, that's okay. Your exile wants you to feel how bad it was. Don't get scared. It's fine.
Yeah. This also reminds me of Jacob Hamm, who is the psychologist who's head of psychiatry or psychology at Mount Sinai, which I think was mentioned in our previous book discussion. He has this thing where he just goes there so much with his clients. And for example, he tells the story of the first time a girl told him about her rape, a very violent rape, and he just threw up. Like he just threw up in front of her because he went to it so deeply himself. And yeah, and that kind of style. And I just thought like that can be, I guess different people like different styles, but that can be so I don't know, I would feel just so warmed that a therapist was willing to feel the terror with me. And the idea, of course, is he brings self energy with that. He does a lot of IFS, he said. Yeah, so
it's curious. I've had a client, because I can sometimes, I often can hold space, but there are those rare times when I shed a tear. And I've had clients tell me, oh, wow, you care. No one else does, or never had this experience, and because I'm like shedding a tear, hearing their stories, like, oh my God, you're the only one who cares.
Yeah. Wow, yeah, I can imagine. If I'm telling a really deeply like impactful thing and someone's just compassionate yet calm, yet it's no, it'd be amazing if someone shed a tear, you know. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, Mark?
Oh, yeah, leave it on the page where it was. I
Oh,
was gonna
sorry.
comment on that.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, our agenda part, like if we don't come at protectors, or we don't come at protectors in an addictive system with our own change agenda, and then I like how it talks about people with addictions, like are all sorts of problems for themselves and their families and others, and that dysfunction. And so the natural attitude, and then like it says too, the natural attitude is that I want that it annoys and worries themselves and others. And therapists, we go to therapy to change, to become a better person, to get over the things that are dysfunctioning our lives, if alcohol's destroying our life or whatever. And then that idea of, I just was thinking about the idea of exile is, oh yeah, the natural thing when you want to change is there's some bad things in me that I want to get rid of, and that's like put them into exile. And that the idea of the two of the 8 C's, I think it's 8 C's, like the curiosity and the connection, and maybe compassion is even one of the 8 C's for all I know. That idea, it's the opposite of exiling. And when I did lots of meditation, I remember, like in meditation, where you're trying to bring the self to the fore, when you see things in yourself that you don't like, then see the don't liking and don't try to change it or say, oh, I'm trying to get beyond this, because that judging yourself as opposed to just being curious and open. When you're curious and open and connect to the thing that's maybe a negative thought, it just transforms it, as opposed to, oh yeah, I got to get rid of this negative thought. And so you're judging the negative thought, and that's just another negative attitude. So it's like it just disarms it when you become the. So, but I love the fact that I just was realizing such a simple thing. Oh yeah, you're exiling things, emotions and memories, like it says. You're exiling them when you're saying, I've got to change this, as opposed to that totally different attitude of IFS. Be curious about it, get to know it, see what it's doing and stuff, and then it transforms the whole relationship. So I just like this. It's my favorite part of the discussion so far, this our agenda part. I'm complete.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much, Mark, for sharing. It's brilliant. And before we finish, I would like us to have a quick look at the common parts, managers and firefighters, common therapist managers. And they are the controlling, caretaking, judging, critical, overly responsible, perfectionistic. I think you don't have to be just a therapist to have all those parts. You might be a mother or a father, or at work, you might be, you might have students, and then some of those parts might maybe come up. And I wonder if you recognize any of those parts in your system. And I'm gonna quickly call out the therapists, firefighters, and the exiles. So the firefighters are the angry, yes. You can see some of them in yourself, Grace. I can see your thumbs up. Therapists,
All of them.
all of them, yeah, me too. Oh my God, yes. I don't call myself perfectionistic, but when I read here the definition, that was okay, but this would have been better. No, I have that a lot. So yes. I often call judging and critical, I call them like a critical thing, but judging is here, Sykes separates the judging and the critical part. For you guys, do you notice it as a different part, the judging and the critical? I'm just curious. Do you normally notice them in yourselves or clients as one? As would you just call it critical, or you say, oh no, that
think of it
isn't?
as the same. I mean, it just that here the critical is more severe, but I would
Yes,
think of them the same. Yeah.
it seems like the judging has got a lot of shoulds. You should do that. The critical is like, oh my God, you messed up again. Yeah, yeah, it feels a bit like, but we'll only know if we go inside and explore our system. So yeah, the firefighters is the angry, distracting, colluding, escapist, soothing, dissociating. The colluding, there's here like an example. Yeah, it's not really that big a deal. I would call that more like a minimizer. But yeah, it's okay. And I will move on the exile list, and I find that very interesting. The hopeless, ashamed, guilty, over-identified. You're just like me. Yeah. Overwhelmed and sad.
What does over-identified mean? Like that you're
So,
just like me? Can you explain that?
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, my understanding is like when you have a client and you think, oh my God, you're just like me. Yeah, that's what
Oh, I thought this was the client's parts. This is still the therapist parts. Okay, I
yeah,
thought
it's
it's
a therapist
the
part.
client. I see.
Yeah.
Oh, because yes, sorry, therapist exiles. Yeah.
Yeah. It is, yeah, or projection, I guess. I don't know. You're just like me. That's like projected. But she calls it over-identified. I think I would like to print that list. So I find that really interesting. And do you identify with those parts at all? Do you identify, the over-identifier? Yeah. Do you what do you think about this list, guys? Yeah, Marlene?
Well, I think it's a good list. It's accurate to me.
Mhm.
And I think some of these are universal. They're kind of like archetypes,
Yes.
like what like Jung, like the one ashamed,
Mhm.
guilty, hopeless. These are universal. What do you call them? The collective unconscious. We all experience it, no matter who we are, where we are, what language we speak.
Yeah. Oh my God, I love that. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
And just to mention, like one of them that stood out for me is the sad, because I do, and the overwhelmed. I do sometimes get clients who tend to be they come with exiles, and their exiles are like, so they're crying and sad and overwhelmed. And it's about, and Sykes tells you how to approach those exiles. There's a vignette about working with exiles. So if there's nothing else, I'll leave it for a couple seconds, but my intention is to close our recorded portion of the meeting, and next week we'll move on to the to finish the section 4 treatment. And okay, thank you for watching. And today is the 15th of June 2024. Thank you, and speak soon.